Good morning, Jacob. Good morning, Nick.
Morning, Chris.
Given the immense sacrifices made by millions during COVID, will you apologise, Jacob, for describing the Partygate scandal as, quote, fluff?
No, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is try to contextualise that we have a war going on in Ukraine. We have atrocities being carried out. We have pictures coming through that show the enormous brutality of Putin's army. And what I was saying was that in the context of what is going on, not just with Ukraine, but also with the cost of living crisis, this is not the most important issue in the world. Having said that, people should obviously obey the law.
Chris?
Well, number one, we know that Boris Johnson has clearly misled lots of people by saying that were no
No,
parties.
you don't.
And then it was well, hang on. He has said that the rules were followed at all times, which last week's revelation of 20 fixed penalty notices would rather suggest that was incorrect.
The fact that the Prime Minister was given wrong information doesn't mean he misled people.
So, Chris, I'll come back. So the Prime Minister was given wrong information. Is that the situation?
Well, the Prime Minister said that he was told that the rules were followed, but that turns out not to be correct, and we know that fines have now been issued. But the Prime Minister can only work on the information he is given.
So it was the information that was incorrect, not the Prime Minister?
If the Prime Minister is told information that is incorrect and passes that information on, he has made no deliberate effort to mislead anybody.
You don't for one second countenance the idea he's attempted to mislead Parliament, Mr Rees-Mogg?
No, I don't.
OK, back to Chris. Chris?
Well, I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous sycophancy because you owe the guy a job in the cabinet, the cabinet job you have. One of my relatives, Jacob, last year had a stroke. I had to wait 4 hours outside accident emergency. Other people I saw were alone with chest pains in the sorts of terrible conditions. Yet the Prime Minister and other people were having quizzes, parties, cheese and wine parties, while other people did what they were supposed to do. I mean, you insult the intelligence of the British people with your remarks, Jacob.
I don't think that's right. Obviously, COVID was a terribly difficult time for people, and people died unaccompanied, and that is the saddest thing. And the picture of the Queen at Prince Philip's funeral will, I think, remain in all our minds. So, of course, people should have obeyed the rules.
But they didn't within number 10.
And some people didn't, and we now know that some fines have been issued.
But
I would reiterate that is not as significant as what is going on in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis.
But for someone such as Chris, respectfully, Mr Rees-Mogg, and for some of my listeners who bade farewell to their loved ones as they got in ambulances, never to see them again, who went to hospital wards and were not permitted on there due to COVID, to hear that at that very time there were parties going on within
They are understandably cross about this.
It's a visceral feeling.
They are understandably cross about this.
Which they don't see, Mr Rees-Mogg, as, quotes, fluff or, quotes, fundamentally trivial.
But I think we have to think about, in the inquiry, whether this level of rule was right. We need to get to what was the fundamental issue.
But that doesn't help someone saying goodbye to Grandad.
I agree with that. But what we should learn from this is not in relation to parties, but was it ever right to say that you weren't allowed to be with people as they were dying? And I think it's so important that the inquiry that is going to take place looks into whether the restrictions were proportionate, because actually, I think, you remember the picture from a funeral where an official came along and said that I think it was a son shouldn't be near.
The son was taken from his mum.
Yes. This was not something that should ever have happened, in my view. That element of rule enforcement, of approach to rules, was simply unkind and inhuman.
But you're almost arguing against yourself, because if that son and that widow encountered that level of grief, to hear a senior politician describe it, quote, as fluff and fundamentally trivial, that's sickening to them, Mr Rees-Mogg. I ask you once again to review those words.
No, I think those words, in the context of what's going on in Ukraine, are completely reasonable. I don't think the issue of what may or may not have happened in Downing Street and what we are now finding out is fundamental. What I think is fundamental is that we look in the inquiry at how the rules were devised and the effect that they had, because I think some of those rules were inhuman.
Chris, thanks for your call. Sympathies for your loss. Rob.